Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar today, a decarb policy panel. I'm Joe Wachunas with Electrify Now, here with Wesley Allen as well. We've got a really all-star packed group of panelists here to talk to us about decarbonization and the policies that are driving decarbonization forward. So we'll introduce them in just a second. So Wesley, this is our final webinar of Clean Air Week, but talk to us about what we've been learning a little bit this week.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So it's been a really fun week, full with webinars and educational events. And really the goal of Clean Air Week is to highlight both the dangers of burning gas, fossil gas, natural gas. There's so many ways to call what we burn in our homes. Some of those health hazards, and then also highlight organizations and advocates who are working to clean up our indoor air. And in particular, today we're going to talk a little bit about not only cleaning up indoor air, but also some of the relationships between indoor air pollution and outdoor air pollution as it relates to policy solutions. So here's an outline of some of the events we've already held. We have YouTube recordings of these events, so feel free to go to Electrify Now's YouTube site to check out those webinars that have passed. And today, of course, we have the Decarbonization Policy Panel, and we're so lucky to have these experts on board. It's our last virtual event, but if you are in Portland, Oregon, or the Northwest, feel free to join us for the Electrify Portland Home Electrification Fair. We wanted to call out that we have some shareable graphics and resources on our Clean Air Week website. So the URL is listed there. This includes fact sheets on some of the pollutants in fossil or natural gas, and also some graphics that kind of make you think. Feel free to use them, share them. They're there for your use. And then lastly, we made a fossil or quote natural gas quit line. This has been really fun. So if you call 1-877-QUIT-GAS and leave a voicemail with your information and some of your concerns or a little bit about your electrification process, we'll give you an email back or a call back and help you problem solve. So feel free to call 1-877-QUIT-GAS.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Wesley. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about decarbonization and the policies that will drive that forward. We're going to be looking at some exciting policy developments as well as some of the challenges given the times we live in. We're going to look at both local, state, regional approaches to get the healthy air standards and phasing out fossil fuels. And effective messaging and media strategies. We're going to look at roles of governments, utilities, advocates, businesses, and consumers in accelerating this progress and more. And we've got a really awesome all-star cast. I'm just going to introduce our panelist and moderator, Ann Pernick from the Safe Cities Senior Advisor at Stand.Earth. Ann works with local governments and community leaders across the U.S. and beyond to support them in stopping fossil fuel expansion and phasing out fossil fuels at the local level. So Ann will be leading our moderated discussion today, and she'll introduce the rest of our panelists. So Ann, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe and Wesley. Oh, and I love that quit line. That's so cool. I hadn't seen that yet. Welcome and thank you for being here, everyone. And with special thanks to the Electrify Now and Clean Air Week organizers and our speakers. I am Ann Pernick with Safe Cities at Stand.Earth. I'm your facilitator today, and I will introduce our speakers very briefly. You can see their full bios will be shared via the chat. We're honored to have this powerhouse panel today. Marnice Jackson, Executive Director of the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, Emily Levin, Policy and Program Director for Clean Buildings at Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management, or NESCOM, Allison McMunn, Program Director at Sunstone Strategies, Kara Saylor, JD, Director and Staff Attorney at the Green Energy Institute at Lewis and Clark Law School, and Nancy L. Seidman, Senior Advisor at the Regulatory Assistance Project, or RAP. Thank you all so much for being here today, and thank you to our audience too. For our format today, I've got a question from each speaker to share part of the landscape we're in terms of approaches on buildings and also developments, opportunities, and challenges. And then we'll move into more of a roundtable and then bring in questions from you all as well. I'm going to ask you to please put your questions in the Q&A tab rather than the chat. That'll make it easier to find the questions. Great to share other things in the chat, but put your questions in the Q&A tab. That will help us get to many more of them. And I'm just going to make sure. Okay, great. I see that the panelists are getting added in the bios are getting added in the chat. That's great. And so I'm just going to start with the questions to set the landscape. And the first one is to Kara. Kara, our movement to decrease air and climate pollution from buildings is often looked at in terms of before and after the Ninth Circuit decision, finding that federal law preempted the city of Berkeley's prohibition on new gas pipelines in buildings. Can you tell us what the landscape was like before that decision? And since then, what has happened?
Yeah, this is a good question to sort of set the scene a little bit and help us remember where we were and what has happened. So between 2019, when the city of Berkeley adopted its natural gas infrastructure ordinance, and 2023, when the Ninth Circuit struck it down, more than 76 cities in California had adopted some sort of gas-free building law, and others both in and out of California had followed suit or were in the process of tackling gas in buildings. The opinion's legal principles are broadly phrased, but it is narrowly applicable only to a building code which prohibits fossil fuel piping in a building from the point of delivery at the gas meter. The court concluded such a prohibition violated the Federal Energy Policy and Conservation Act, or EPCA, because it concerned the energy use of appliances. And Berkeley's ordinance, according to the court, effectively required a quantity of 0 natural gas at the point of use. As a result, the court found the ordinance regulated the energy use, that's an important statutory term, of the covered appliances, which included the kinds of heating appliances like gas furnaces in homes. And as a result, it ran afoul of EPCA's preemption provision. So that California Restaurant Association v. Berkeley decision is binding only in the Ninth Circuit states. And so that's generally, that's the 9 Western states and 2 US territories. But although that's the case, the decision did chill forward momentum of all kinds beyond the reach of the Ninth Circuit and beyond the Berkeley style code. So some jurisdictions paused implementation of previously adopted laws, declined to finalize proposed ordinances, or promised not to enforce existing requirements. Now, luckily, multiple courts in other parts of the country have now rejected the Ninth Circuit's reasoning in a variety of contexts. So a federal trial court rejected the EMCA preemption argument brought by trade groups and a labor union against New York City's Local Law 154, which prohibits on-site combustion of fuels above a specified amount in new construction. New York State's all-electric requirements for new buildings also survived a court challenge. Washington's state building code, which was created in a way intended to comply with EPCA, remains in force today despite headwinds of all kinds. And a federal trial court recently upheld air pollution limits on appliances in Southern California. Now, litigation across the United States is pending. Washington, D.C.'s energy code prohibiting fuel combustion for thermal energy had its motion hearing yesterday on the litigation filed by various entities. Oak Park, a suburb of Chicago, adopted an electrification ordinance for new construction. That lawsuit is in the midst of briefing. Challenges of building performance standards, which require benchmarking of emissions or energy use, are ongoing in Maryland and Colorado. And there's now a new challenge to Colorado's recently adopted law requiring a label on gas stoves saying, quote, understand the air quality implications of having an indoor gas stove. So I'll just say that the Trump administration has now bulldozed into power. What I just note is the amazing resistance and resilience of states and local governments bound and determined to continue a focused effort on tackling building emissions from coast to coast and places in between. Los Angeles's recent forward momentum on building performance standards for large buildings, to New Orleans' new energy reporting requirement, to Colorado's gas stove warnings. Brave leaders are unwilling to cede forward momentum, and I just really appreciate them.
Thank you, Kara. My next question is for Marnise. Marnise, we talk a lot about the coasts in this movement, and there's good work and backlash happening in many places. And would you speak to how critical the decarbonization of buildings is in the Midwest in particular, and what kind of challenges advocates are facing and what progress you all are making?
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for having me. So the Midwest has historically relied on coal and natural gas for electricity generation and is the leading consumer of natural gas in the United States. In particular, the Midwest region is leading contributor to climate change, in that if we look at this on a global stage, we are technically number 5 as the biggest emitter of climate change due to our building, and then also transportation. And so with that, climate vulnerability, the Midwest is particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Of course, we know about rising temperatures that threaten the region's agriculture, increased energy demand, which poses a health risk to residents. With the health and equity concerns, industrial facilities and transportation corridors in the Midwest often expose lower income communities and communities of color to harmful pollutants. Decarbonization can reduce this air pollution and mitigate decades of disproportionate health impacts on vulnerable communities, but then we have not having the access to decision-making power to do so. So with the clean energy transition, it offers an opportunity for economic growth in the Midwest, investing in new technology, improving energy efficiency. So with some challenges, in response to local bans on natural gas hookups in new homes and buildings, fossil fuels industry groups have successfully lobbied at 20 states to pass preemption laws. And these laws prevent cities from mandating all electric buildings and force communities to rely on natural gas. I can say that because I live in Michigan. This is a fact. And with renewable energy development, state legislators have also used preemption to address local residents to renewable energy projects. So in Michigan, for example, a state commission can now overrule a local decision to block wind or solar farms, accelerating renewable energy deployment. And some other challenges. So with the Midwest heavily relying on fossil fuel for electricity generation, we have an outdated grid infrastructure, and to accommodate widespread building electrification, the electric grid needs a major upgrade and expansion. So it's kind of like we're facing a chicken and egg dilemma. Generators sometimes hesitate to invest without guarantee of transmission capacity, while transmission developers are reluctant to build without a guaranteed power supply. So this also is continuous political issues, disputes, and of course, this can further delay the crucial projects. Well, let's talk about some progress. In the Midwest cities, we have found ways to advance climate policies, often targeting different areas than those blocked by the state. Cities like Minneapolis and Chicago have focused on benchmarking, building performance, while others like Ann Arbor and Dubuque, Iowa, have developed comprehensive climate action plans. So that's a start. But then also there is a decline in power and sector emissions. The power sector carbon emissions have been declining for over a decade as utilities shift away from coal towards natural gas and cleaner sources. There has been some increase in renewables like wind and solar power, which are rapidly growing and becoming the most affordable new sources of electricity. And then in some Western states like Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan, they have enacted legally binding policies to achieve 100% energy by 2040 or 2050. And then we all know about the Inflation Reduction Act, which is definitely with some progress nationally. So I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Marnise. And yeah, I appreciate both you and Kara highlighting the resilience of advocates in this movement and always finding a way to keep things moving forward. We're going to go now to a question to Nancy. Nancy, not as well known is some of the work on appliances and heat standards. I was going to ask if you could tell us why those are important and what's happening with those approaches.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Ann. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel today and celebrate Clean Air Week. Let me start with the what. On equipment standards, RAP and others are assisting states and localities to adopt zero emission appliance standards as a way to use state and local authority to reduce air pollution and require the phase out of fossil equipment in residential and commercial buildings, which would lead to electrification of those buildings through installing heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. And for RAP and NESCOM actually have worked together on a model rule for states to use to advance this policy based on regulations that were first enacted in California about 20 years ago. A clean heat standard is a performance standard similar to a renewable portfolio standard that requires companies that sell fossil fuels, gas, propane, and oil, to deliver a gradually increasing percentage of low emission heating services like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters to their customers. This is an annual requirement geared to a locality's goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helps lead to reductions through these annual targets that they need to meet. To your question as to why these are important, I would say equipment standards, as have already been highlighted by Kara and Marnice. Buildings obviously are a very important source of air pollution these days. And by phasing out fossil fuel equipment, obviously we help reduce those emissions dramatically. I would say it's also important that because of this leads to state agencies working together to coordinate on incentives for consumers, ensuring equitable implementation, providing training for contractors, consumer education, and examining measures and ensuring that consumers' costs are controlled. So there's many ways for agencies to work together, which is also an important feature, and I think Emily's probably going to address this a little bit more. The Clean Heat Standard provides consumers choices in terms of when and what equipment is replaced and when. They have more, the timing is more flexible. It provides an incentive for the fuel providers, the oil, propane, gas, to consider when and how they move towards phasing out the use of those fuels. And as we've already talked about, buildings are obviously an incredible challenge in this everywhere to reduce their emissions. So you can also include cost containment measures in a clean heat standard. For example, so that the target and the pace of change is managed if need be, if we're finding that the costs are unacceptable in an agency. And then finally, how are these moving forward? It's really exciting for equipment standards. The Bay Area in California is set to be the first to launch their zero emission equipment rule right at the first of next year. As I think Kara mentioned, other locations, I was thinking about New York City, their new construction requirements start the beginning of next year. And as Kara also mentioned, many places where, at least for new buildings, a lot of movement towards all electric buildings. So, but it's also obviously important because of legacy equipment, the kinds of regulations we're looking at would helpful. And we think maybe Maryland is going to be the first one on the East Coast to advance a zero emission equipment rule, hopefully next year. And on clean heat, I also want to highlight Maryland and Colorado. Colorado has had requirements for their largest gas utility, to put in place plans to reduce the use of gas over the next, I believe they've got targets for 2030, I believe. And that's a form of a clean heat standard directed right at the gas companies. And again, Maryland, leading the way, will likely be proposing a clean heat program sometime next year, and are also trying to put in place this year fuel reporting requirements like already exist in Massachusetts. And while that might not seem like much, it's actually really important for the states to get information they haven't previously had on who's delivering which fuels where, so they have a baseline and can then set the reduction targets. So I hope that helps give people some background, and I'm obviously happy to answer questions and look forward to the discussion.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. And you set up Emily a little bit, and we are going to Emily next. We've heard about the specific policy and regulatory approaches that are important right now. And as we were preparing for today, you noted the bigger picture that you hope people keep in mind. And so I wanted to invite you to speak to that.
Yeah, so NESCOM primarily works with states. We stand for Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management. So we work with state air, environmental agencies, sometimes energy offices, but all of the folks working on decarbonizing buildings from lots of different perspectives. I'm really excited to share that we actually recently worked with a group of states to release a multi-state action plan, accelerating the transition to zero emission residential buildings. I'm popping a link into the chat. So you can go access that. And it's a very comprehensive plan that we developed with our states. We've been working with, we now have 10 states plus DC. I'll just rattle them off quickly in case any of you are in these states. You can congratulate them for signing on. California, Colorado, DC, Massachusetts, Maryland, Maine, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Washington. And the multi-state action plan has more than 50 strategies that states can use to speed this transition to zero emission buildings and to clean heat. There's the regulatory strategies like the ones that Nancy mentioned to drive the transition through, there's carrots and sticks through the stick side, through mandating certain approaches. But there's also a lot of other tactics that states can use. We actually have worked with RAP and also Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships we have another document that I can also pop into the chat, setting the table for building decarbonization, which envisions 4 legs of a table for building decarbonization, and that states should really be working across all 4 of those areas, which are equity and workforce investment, carbon reduction obligations. So that's things like the clean heat standard that Nancy mentioned, codes and standards, which are building codes and building performance standards, and also things like the zero emission standard that Nancy mentioned. Also utility planning and regulation. So just to focus in on the 2 that Nancy didn't speak to, equity and workforce developments are how states can work to support workforce training and to really make sure the workforce is ready for this transition. Anybody that has tried to install a heat pump or a heat pump water heater, unfortunately, many of them have encountered challenges in finding a knowledgeable contractor who will install a heat pump at a reasonable price. And so all of that is an area that states can help with. They can raise the bar on training, they can create contractor networks, they can offer certain incentives and try to align requirements and best practices, things like that. And then states can also do a lot either on their own or in partnership with utilities to incentivize and offer financing to support adoption, to straighten out the electric rates to make sure that the cost to operate a heat pump will be affordable once you've got one in, and that your bills aren't actually going to go up if you shift from gas to electricity. So there's a lot of tools that states have in their toolbox, all of which are documented in our report. Oh, and I see that my colleague Rihanna has popped in a link to the Setting the Table for building decarbonization brief that we did as well. So lots of resources, and would encourage folks to check out what their states are doing and compare it to the pretty comprehensive list of more than 50 actions that states can be doing in our action plan, and see where your state maybe could lean in a little bit more. There's a lot of ways that states can support this developing market.
Great. Thank you, Emily. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the communications side. And Allison, I feel like we're in this incredible moment where we are having a lot of breakthrough while we're still having backlash. So there are the different local policy advances, like Berkeley coming back with an existing buildings policy after being the subject of the lawsuit that Kara talked about. Marnice talked about the continued progress in the Midwest, people finding a way despite the preemption laws that passed. Nancy and Emily talking about the layered approaches, and Nancy talking about some of the things that are talked about or like happen a little bit more quietly, I feel like, in terms of the clean heat and appliance standards. So with all of that in mind, with someone with your communications expertise, how are we doing? How is the building decarbonization movement playing right now? And what do we need to understand about messaging to keep making progress?
I love how you frame this up. Yeah, I think actually right now the movement is actually doing a pretty good job of meeting the moment. And right now, economically, people are hurting. We're in this affordability crisis. Energy costs are outpacing inflation, and households are really struggling to make ends meet while for-profit utility corporations that are also monopolies are really raking in record profits. So utility greed and high energy costs are the problem, but the solution is actually highly efficient technologies like heat pumps. So I think the electrification movement is seeing success in part because of energy efficiency. So across all polling, message testing, over and over, we've seen that people really value energy efficiency. They get it. Energy efficiency can really reduce energy use and costs. And we're seeing this actually translated in the market with a really strong consumer desire for modern electric equipment and appliances that are highly efficient. They want highly efficient homes and appliances, and this is really helping drive the market momentum. So heat pumps, as many of you may know, have actually outsold gas furnaces since 2022. And the more we really position the electrification movement as just an opportunity to increase the energy efficiency of homes, the greater the consumer demand that we're going to see for this technology, which inspires states and gives them confidence to really pursue and pass policies that will help people upgrade their homes and deliver energy savings, particularly for those who are on the front lines or low income and face the greatest burden. So we do need state leadership now more than ever. Despite energy bills being on the rise, we're actually witnessing a federal rollback of energy efficiency measures. So the energy bill safety net provided by LIHEAP, the weather tax credits and energy efficiency standards that we've had for decades, even a tax on like the universally valued and beloved Energy Star program. Yet, despite this kind of baffling war on efficiency, people still need relief from high energy costs. So advocates have really a key opportunity to meet the moment and tap into this growing sense of economic populism and call upon states to step up and lead by passing policies and measures to modernize homes and deliver other energy efficiency solutions. And thankfully, a lot of states have started to do this. So of course, I know I'm talking a lot about cost savings and economics, but all electric buildings do offer other benefits as well. And these are things that people do care about. So healthier air, fewer asthma attacks and hospitalizations. There are also cost savings associated with that. Efficient, affordable cooling is life-saving. Nearly half of all heat-related deaths occur indoors. And keep in mind that I don't think a lot of people know this, but the best heat pump on the market is actually 24% more efficient than the best AC. So building all electric is actually, in addition to that, so building all electric is actually cheaper and faster. So it can actually help solve for other things, such as the affordable housing crisis, and be part of that solution. And we can also build homes to be more resilient. So we have a lot of drafty homes today that weren't really built to protect against the growing weather extremes of today and tomorrow. But we can build new housing to a higher quality that's better, stronger energy efficiency standards, so it can better protect against extreme cold and heat. In fact, homes built to this higher standard can actually maintain their temperature twice as long during a power outage. So when you think about like Hurricane Katrina, people lost power and then extreme heat came in and it left a lot of people, like it put a lot of lives at risk, and I think a few lives were lost as well. So I think there are a lot of benefits we should keep in mind. I do think we need to meet the moment, and we're truly in this kind of transformative moment. There's this need and we have the solution. So we do have a lot to offer. So just knowing your audience, knowing what to lead with at that time. And I think the trick is to kind of meet people where they are and lead with those immediate household level benefits and speak, their language, which is really energy efficiency.
Thank you, Allison. That's really helpful. And it leads really well to the roundtable question about bringing other people into this work that we're all doing. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what the role of other stakeholders is in this, including utilities, government, advocates, consumers, contractors, and manufacturers, and other stakeholders. And Allison, we'll stay with you for a moment. I think you were going to kick us off and talk about the role of consumers.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, as I mentioned, I think consumers are really going to be a driving force. They're really clearing the runway, right, to give confidence for policymakers to take action. And I think, as I mentioned, like heat pumps have outsold gas furnaces for a while. Electric water heaters have actually outsold gas options for even longer. And I think heat pumps might also be closing in on AC sales. So it's like, truly there's consumer demand there. This is what they want. It's not like we're forcing people to do this. Like people are adopting it because they see the benefit. Even like gas stoves, they were once considered the gold standard, right? And yet now induction cooking technology is really taking off. Chefs, home cooks, they're really won over by this tech because it's just a better technology. It boils water in seconds. More precise cooking, it keeps kitchens cooler, and they're more efficient, but they're also like they're easier to clean. I mean, who wants to clean around the grates in a gas stove, you know? So it's just there's a lot of things that's really beneficial that it just wins people over. So I feel like what we have on our side is really excellent, just superior technology. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that it just came out a bit ago that kitchen designers are actually stating that in the next 3 years, I think induction will be the most popular cooking type. It's like leaps and bounds. And so, you know, again, this is all driven by consumer desire for this technology. It's modern, state of the art, highly efficient, it's convenient, and it's moving the market. And it's really bolstering policymakers to pass measures to help households upgrade and further drive adoption. Manufacturers are taking note, you know, and it's also driving investments, innovation, it's making better technologies, and it's lowering the cost. So we're seeing all of this momentum, the pieces are working together. I really feel like this is how we're going to win. And it's this interplay between these. So I hope if nothing else, people like walk away feeling like some positivity with the motion of this. And I think policy is really key, but you're not just doing this alone, right?
I appreciate that, Allison. I was just looking up something about like whether or not you can flip on an induction, because I had heard that that was a concern that you can't flip things in the air. And so I was just learning a little bit about these silicone mats that are letting people flip with induction. So anyway, I feel like we're getting to the point where all of the but what is getting what about is getting answered. And so Marnise, what do you think? What are you thinking about the other stakeholders that you would like to see jumping in on this, or stakeholders that you're already working with in the Midwest that you feel are helping drive it?
So in the Midwest, and especially with coalition building, everybody has to know their role because it takes everybody to eat this big elephant, right? But in particular, the advocacy groups who champion decarbonization through policy work and community organizing and consumer education. One, influencing policy. They participate in the legislative and regulatory processes to push for stronger building codes, building performance standards, and utility reform. And that's definitely the focus of what we do in a coalition. But then another thing, promoting equity, advocates for policies that they prioritize vulnerable and low income communities. As mentioned, we have high utility rates, and we do not have a lot of affordable housing in the United States. So this will benefit mostly for cleaner and healthier buildings. And then, of course, educating the public by raising awareness amongst consumers and policymakers about the benefits of electrification. I think I wanted to speak to more, well, since she talked about the consumers, I wanted to speak to the contractors and manufacturers because they are definitely vital for delivering the technology and services required for decarbonization. But then there's also the opportunity of creating more contractors where you can get certified in high school and then also go to a 2-year college versus going to get a 4-year degree, which we know can cost a lot of money a lot of economic burden, especially in a time like this. But then also manufacturers can scale up the production of low carbon materials, highly efficient electric heat pumps, and other decarbonization technologies. Then they also have an opportunity to be more innovative and inform. Manufacturers can publish environmental products declarations, promote data, while contractors can educate building owners on the options available. So by this, they can improve the practices, and contractors can embrace low carbon construction practices and improve waste management, and then also invest in electric equipment. So those two I really wanted to highlight. Kind of want to stay away from the government, but if someone don't talk about that one, I'll can talk about that one.
Great. Thank you, Marnice. And Carrie, you also wanted to share a bit on the community of advocates piece.
Yeah, Marnice, I appreciate your call out on the government. I guess I'm loving the optimism, and there's the reality. And this week for me, for some reason, has just been so dang hard. And maybe it's the, special attention on the climate crisis, and it just feels like it's bringing it home for me. And I am an optimist. So when I'm, not able to sort of carry the weight of the young people I work with, the young people in my home, it feels really hard. But I turn often to Saul Griffith from Rewiring America. He, has a book out about an optimist playbook. And I just recall reading a passage, and I'll put it in the chat for folks who want to read it. He has a field manual, and there's a passage in there that says everyone can contribute their personal efforts and skills to a war scale mobilization effort. And he walks through what that looks like. And he talks about not making compromises, not that we lose the battle against climate change one compromise at a time. And he talks about not being able to afford delays due to despair. Despair must be channeled into hope, and hope converted into action. And so just every day when we wake up, whether we're a stakeholder, a regulator, an advocate, a consumer, we have to keep this front of mind. We have to engage in conversations with the people in our communities. There is a way to do this. And guess what? We will be better off if we do it now. So that's what I have to offer. It's really hard. We have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And support each other. These are really nice places to do that.
Thank you, Kara. Nancy, we're going to have you speak a little bit on the utilities piece. And then Emily, because you have been thinking so much on the layers, we appreciate you coming in to round us out after Nancy and talk about who we're missing, who we're forgetting about in this stakeholder conversation.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Anne. And Kara, thanks for those remarks. Let me try to keep the optimism going by talking about obviously how the utilities are obviously central to these programs and that they provide electricity and gas to all of us now. And so how do we get them basically to change their business models and to see that electrification is where we all want to go? Some others on the panel have mentioned, for example, the energy efficiency programs. Those are incredibly important, making sure those stay at a level that sustains consumer actions and provides good incentives for folks. Those are in some places under attack. And so the funding levels need to be kept up. There needs to be very attention paid to ensuring that all consumers have a chance to electrify, are eligible for incentives, maybe even get additional legs up in terms of incentives if they don't, if lower income consumers. So that was one thing I wanted to mention, was for all of us to keep our eyes on the efficiency programs and make sure they're supporting electrification efforts, equitable efficiency efforts. I wanted to mention two specific things for gas utilities for folks to keep in mind as we're basically looking at taking the gas utilities out of business over time. And that is obviously a very threatening thing, and they are fighting back hard. But two things that have seen successes recently are limiting the gas line extension policies. I know for example, New York and Massachusetts recently, eliminating sort of a requirement that lines be extended, sort of limiting that or making consumers pay. And when consumers have to pay, they probably won't see gas line extensions, and then they will move to electric options if they don't have the ability to get gas, most likely. Another thing is sort of the depreciation rates. I'm sorry to get down in the weeds on some of the financial stuff, but requiring gas utilities to not take 30 years, where we know we don't have 30 years on climate change, to depreciate new assets. If they are forced to take a shorter amount of time for new assets, then they may not put in. They may not seek to replace the existing gas lines, or they may not put in new ones because they're being forced to look at the reality of that this is not a good way to look at our future in terms of looking at gas. So those are two sort of, pretty specific things that I offer to folks. If your state is not looking at those, you might want to go to your utility commissions. I mean, not to get, I know I was asked to talk about the utilities, but obviously the utility regulators, and RAP does a lot of work with utility regulators, are incredibly important in terms of keeping the utilities on a pace and following policies that will help us lead to electrification. So I think I'll leave it there because give Emily the next shot.
Thanks, Nancy. And Emily, anything that you want to add on stakeholders that have been brought up, or people that we are forgetting about, players we're forgetting about?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I want to double down on contractors as such a key, when you think about how people make decisions, they're often advised by their contractors, and if their contractors are advising them against a heat pump, oh, these don't work in a cold climate, or oh, it's a lot of also a lot of contractors that aren't super familiar with heat pumps will price in kind of a risk premium where they're just like, well, we don't really want to do this. There's sort of a shortage of HVAC contractors, so they don't necessarily need your job. They might just charge you a lot and be like, well, if you'll pay me $20,000, I'll do your job. So that speaks to some of the strategies to address that issue. I wanted to point out with contractors, one of the biggest things, in addition to the training that I mentioned before, one of the biggest things is just scale. We need more contractors. So the more contractors there are operating in a certain region, installing heat pumps, that alone will start to drive prices down through competition. We are seeing kind of heat pump specialist contractors come into the market, and governments can be really helpful, and utilities, by having lists of contractors. So you as a customer, you can access a qualified contractor more easily. You can go on a website and find a heat pump qualified contractor. Efficiency Maine, for example, actually sorts those contractors by how many sort of incentivized units they install. So the ones that are doing the most and have the most experience get sort of ranked higher on their list. So there are ways to help people find these knowledgeable contractors and not get caught in sort of contractor purgatory, where they can't find a knowledgeable contractor. And then a lot of these are emergency replacements, which speaks to the need to get the whole supply chain moving. So sort of some other groups, that's the manufacturers, that's also the wholesale distributors and retailers. And there's some really good programs that really start by engaging at those levels. So working with manufacturers, you can access their training networks. It's really important to work with wholesale distributors because that's where the contractors get their equipment. And if you need that high efficiency heat pump to be stocked and promoted from the distributor to the contractor and available in the truck at the time you need it on an emergency basis, which involves working with these other kind of supply chain actors. So all of that stuff is really important. And there are a lot of things that state governments, local governments, and utilities can do to support that whole process. And then on the government side, I'll just put another plug in for rate design. I'm extremely kind of bullish on rate design because I know it's kind of a wonky topic, but there are these heat pump rates, basically just charging less in the winter for electricity than in the summer. The grid in most places has a summer peak. And so by switching people to an efficient heat pump, you're actually improving the summer peak situation because heat pumps are more efficient than the current air conditioning. And on the winter peak, you're making better use of the grid that already exists and is already built. You're using it at another time, and having more people using electricity actually drives down rates for everyone. So to me, that's a very important win-win solution. You don't have to fundraise for it. Utility takes in the same amount of money, just a little bit less from each customer, but over a broader base of customers because people are electrifying. So it's a win-win-win, and it really gets the economics moving because somebody knows that they're going to save money by installing a heat pump. So they might be willing to pay a little bit more upfront and save money down the road. And I also just can't stress enough how quickly the heat pump market is changing. So I think technology innovation is also going to solve, I just am looking in the chat, there's a question about the increased cost of new beneficial technologies with the growing gap in household income. I mean, obviously there's a lot of specific strategies and supports for lower income households that we should be doing. But I really think the heat pump market is going to look totally different in 5 years from what we see today. We're seeing new form factors like window heat pumps that are less expensive. You just drop it in, you don't need an expensive installation. We're seeing 120 volt heat pump water heaters. We're bringing over from Europe air to water heat pumps that are eventually going to be a better solution for customers that use residential boilers. So we're going to have like kind of better heat pump technologies for every kind of unique type of installation, even with space constraints and kind of electric capacity constraints, and that alone is going to drive down the cost. So we're still kind of at the early stage of the advanced heat pump market. Like heat pumps have been around for many years, but not the advanced modern variable speed heat pumps that we have today that Allison was talking about. It's not your granddad's heat pump, it's the new modern heat pump. So I'm really excited about how that technology transition is going to really make it so truly there is an electrification option for every situation, and it's also going to really drive down the cost over time, and the contractors are going to get with the program as more consumers tell them how much they love and want these technologies.
Emily, thank you so much for rounding out the stakeholder part and then also moving into the Q&A seamlessly. Wonderful. Thank you. We're going to bring in our other speakers on these questions in just a second. I want to note there's several great questions that have come through the Q&A, and on the some of the affordability questions, there are some great resources that have been shared by the speakers. And hopefully we'll be able to share those. Looking at you, Joe, can we share those resources as well as the recording?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'll share out all the resources in our follow-up email. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe to help flag the questions. Again, thank you to all of our speakers in the audience. Really appreciating this conversation.
Yeah, I thought there was a great one from Megan that could start us off, talking about how some states or a lot of states have these proceedings underway that are talking about the future of gas utilities and whether they can use that money that they're going to put into investing in gas infrastructure, but instead of investing in gas infrastructure, putting that towards investing in electrification. And Megan's curious on what states have made the most progress on this topic. So I'm not sure who wants to take that first, but please feel free to jump in.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about it a little bit, and then Nancy, I don't know if you have something more to add. I did reference the couple of line extension allowance papers that have come out. There's one from RMI and there's a recent one from Building Decarbonization Coalition. So that is one thing that has come out of those future of gas proceedings that's been really helpful. The other way that we're thinking about saving money, so instead of investing in fossil fuel infrastructure that, as Nancy said, it depreciates, has a lifetime of 50 to 60 years, instead of making either initial investments in that infrastructure or repairing or replacing that infrastructure, we do an analysis of what are called non-pipeline alternatives. So if it's cheaper, in fact, to electrify a neighborhood instead of replacing leaky pipeline, let's do that instead. And that has started to pick up. It is one of those things that it may require some pressure from the regulatory agency, right? The Public Utility Commission, to really focus in on what is the least cost, least risk utility service to the customer? Because the gas utilities, especially if they're a single utility as opposed to a dual fuel utility, are not particularly interested in, eliminating part of their business. So this is going to be a really important piece in the upcoming years as we see spotty electrification, which is going to be very expensive for everyone. Not a good use of ratepayer dollars, and we certainly don't want it to end up on the taxpayer if we've got investments that a gas utility insists it has to be repaid for. Nancy, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, thanks. I would call out, I mentioned Colorado earlier on future gas work in terms of their clean heat work. Obviously, California has done some interesting things. There's some good things going on in the Midwest that Marnice might want to talk about. Illinois in particular has a progressive docket going in terms of doing some pilots on gas issues. Minnesota, I believe, as well. Maryland's has recent opened. There's a lot going on around the country, and it's sometimes not, as Kara mentioned, not characterized as a future of gas docket. It's maybe narrower in terms of line extension or other things.
Or it comes up in rate cases, and if you're
Right.
if you're not an attorney or an analyst, you're not
Right.
really maybe tracking the rate cases.
Yeah, it's
So,
hard to follow all these things. You're right. Yeah, and they're complicated dockets, obviously. But if the questioner wants, Joe, I'm assuming our emails might be in some of the follow-up materials, and so then be happy to talk to the person who sent in the question and get some materials that RAP has developed out to you after this. It warrants a more in-depth discussion, I think. Then obviously we have time for it today. But great question.
We have a couple questions in the chat that kind of dig at the affordability crisis and income inequality in the country. And I know a lot of you have already touched on that in different ways, including Emily. You just mentioned just that this technology continues to just rapidly speed, and as more of these devices flood the market, they will become inherently more affordable. But I was wondering, in this era where we have IRA, federal rebates starting to expire, and we have some of these issues with courts invalidating policy strategies, what are some of those affordability principles to allow folks of all income levels really reap the benefits of electrification in the home?
I want to something about the clean heat standard that is aimed at this would be that you set targets specifically for low income and middle income consumers to meet and as part of that program, so that the utilities have to ensure that technologies are deployed equitably across consumer classes. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. You ensure that all classes of consumers have targets, and particularly low and moderate income consumers, so they can take advantage. And if that means giving higher incentives, then that's what it means. And that then may come through a rate case proceeding to figure out how to recover those costs, or the utility just ends up actually having to pay the higher costs to make sure all consumers are included. So that's one option. And obviously the state, as I mentioned before, state energy efficiency programs, insisting in your state that those programs are maintained at a high level also helps back up or cover the loss of the federal incentives.
Yeah, if I could add to this, I think a really important thing now is making sure that we are really optimizing all the investments that are happening. So I think too often, and this is something that Allison and her colleagues have helped teach me, but too often this is framed as kind of electrification and clean energy versus nothing, or versus neutral or status quo, where it's actually electrification and clean energy versus really expensive investments in repair and maintenance and continued investment into the fossil fuel system and all of the associated infrastructure. So actually it can be cheaper if we're smarter about how we make these investments, and that's at kind of every level. It's with the utility systems. Do we really need to be maintaining two systems? in a home, do you really need to be installing two different types of systems? There is a question about all electric new construction being cheaper, and that's one of the reasons why you're going from, two types of fuels to one, which is clean electricity. And at the efficiency program level, in a lot of states, we have very robust investments going in from ratepayers into existing programs that potentially could be optimized to better support electrification goals. So maybe it's time to no longer direct incentives towards efficient, gas equipment, but really to focus on helping people switch to clean electric and high efficiency solutions. Just are we getting the highest and best use out of the dollars we are investing versus, pouring money into a system that's going to become obsolete or become a stranded asset. So I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle here that we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I'll just add that there's all kinds of interesting creative thinking about this. Just this week, I think Rewiring America put out a report on upgrading existing inefficient heating systems to make room for hyperscalers, right? So maybe data centers should be investing in energy efficiency upgrades, especially for low and middle income folks. If they're going to be, bringing in all the large load that they're bringing in. I'll put that story in the chat, but the idea is, replacing that resistance heating, like your baseboard heating or your resistance water heater that's inefficient with more efficient household appliances. And so really bringing value then and comfort and lower a more affordable electricity to more people.
That idea of the data centers, I mean, rather than building renewable energy somewhere, which is great, which a lot of data centers are doing, but what about energy efficiency and paying for those upgrades? I think that's a really powerful idea, Kara. We're getting close to time, but I wanted to ask Allison and Marnice to comment on this one question about somebody saying that they hear that heat pumps don't work in cold climates. Allison, maybe you could start with what's the best messaging around the electrification being a premium rather than something that doesn't, work here or there. And then Marnice would love to hear about how you all are messaging that in the Midwest.
Yeah, it's kind of like it can be a technical issue too. If the contractor doesn't do the job right or the installer, it can be an issue. But overall, we see heat pumps in the coldest European climates, like Scandinavia, right? And that's been around for decades. So, and then recently, as many of you know, I'm sure the Department of Energy had that cold climate heat pump challenge, and we saw all these new models. So I think it's just like really good to keep that in mind, and that like at the end of the day, people just want to make sure they're going to be comfortable and that it's going to work. It's not going to be an issue for them, and they want it to work. So I think, as I think Emily shared earlier, it's really important to get the contractors on board and educated and build that like workforce. But ultimately, the technology is good. It's there. It's getting better every day. So I think that there is a probably heat pump for every climate out there, and that people should feel like pretty confident in that. Yeah.
And thank you for the question. Yes, heat pumps work in cold weather. And thanks to cold climate models that can provide heat, even in sub-zero temperatures. Although their efficiency may decrease on like very cold days, older models struggle in the cold. New technology allows heat pumps to efficiently extract from heat from outside air or the ground geothermal system. So within cold climates, air source heat pumps use features like variable speed compressors. I just learned this a couple of days ago from my colleague, and improved defrost cycles to operate efficiency at low outdoor temperatures. But then also with geothermal, the ground source heat pumps remain highly effective in cold weather because they extract heat from the stable temperatures. So yes, it does work in the ground, not the air. So in regards to efficiency, even very cold conditions, these modern heat pumps can remain more efficient than traditional fossil fuel systems. So.
Great. Thank you all so much for those answers. Joe and Wesley, thank you for organizing the questions. Thanks for folks for submitting them. I also want to point people to a couple things. There's been some great discussion in the chat. Marnice, I really appreciated the additional stakeholders that you noted. Really, really important point. I wish we had like 2 hours to talk together about those additional folks you added, as well as the folks that we touched on, and other resources in the chat. Again, we'll make sure that you get to those. We also had a question about different kinds of policies, local policies. I included the Safe Cities map. There was a question about, can we make it cost more for folks who want to install gas appliances? Yes, it's already happening. And in fact, we had our first policy pass in Oregon this year in Ashland, our first policy since the Ninth Circuit, which was very, very exciting. Big kudos to Kara for your work on that. And we were happy to support with Safe Cities. You can find out information about that Ashland policy on the Safe Cities map, and as well as lots of electrification policies around the US and in Canada. I know we are just a minute over time. Thanks again to everybody for speaking today. Thanks to our audience and our organizers. And I can stay here for a moment if anybody has any last things that they want to share. And again, just huge kudos to everybody for joining today.
I just wanted to say thank you, and just answer that question in the chat with other stakeholders like real estate and owners and developers. They can accelerate decarbonization by setting ambitious goals, one, for new and existing buildings, by requiring material tracking and efficient construction practices. So of course, we can do the follow-up in regards to other stakeholders, because I would like to dive more into the Public Service Commission, because that's a gamble, especially if you are appointed or elected. And they sometimes are bought out by the local utility. So I think it's more about strategy in regards to the PUCs nowadays. So.
Great. Thank you, Marnice. Anyone else want to jump in with anything else before we hop off?
I just wanted folks to leave feeling hopeful and optimistic. I actually am just coming from Climate Week New York City, where it was quite hopeful and optimistic. I heard about so many really exciting electric technologies and electric boats in the Amazon and electric planes in Alaska. And, the electrification revolution is coming. The technology is better. People like it when they switch to it. So there's a lot we can do to make that happen faster and more effectively and more affordably. And we can and should do all those things. But please feel confident that we have a better technology, that it is inevitable. It is the future. We will get there together.
Love it. I love it. That's a really great note to end on. Thank you so much to folks in the audience who are also working so hard for this in your own decisions for your own house or in advocacy or other work you do. And thanks again to our speakers and organizers. And we look forward to getting everybody the recording and those helpful resource links. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.